a brand new short story. This is unpublished right now. I actually wrote it for an anthology and I just sent it off and haven't heard anything back yet. But I thought I would share something that no one has seen yet, except for my wife. So this is called Out of the Blue. It was 4 o'clock in the morning by the time I got to the house. Jerry had called me at home an hour earlier, knowing I'd still be awake. We both suffered from insomnia. Mine was the symptom of an actual sleep disorder, while Jerry's was the result of too much caffeine in his diet. He claimed this made us brothers of a sort, and I was too tired to disagree with him. Jerry was a real estate agent with a very specific and very unusual area of interest. He only represented properties that were haunted. Houses, condos, farms, stores, warehouses. It didn't matter as long as it had some sort of supernatural taint. It was a niche market, but Jerry was a good salesman. When he wasn't trying to offload the next Amityville horror, he was usually out chasing women at Toronto's finer bars and cocktail lounges. I figured that was why he was calling me that night. "I'm not going out," I said. "You'll have to fly solo tonight, Maverick." "Goose," Jerry said, disappointed. "You wound me." "It's 3 in the morning, Jer. It's past last call." "That's not why I'm calling. And I'm not coming over to look at a rash on any part of your body." "It's not that either." "Then why can't it wait until morning?" "Well, technically it is morning. Then technically I'm hanging up." "Wait," Jerry said. "It's an emergency." "What kind of emergency?" "Do you remember that house I told you about last week? The one north of the city near Barrie?" "No." "I picked up the listing a couple 3 months ago. Remember? The shitbox with a bad roof, but it's got potential?" Still drawing a blank. "Okay, it doesn't matter. I just need you to come up here." "What for?" Jerry hesitated, which gave me a moment of pause because Jerry never hesitated. "It'll be easier to explain once you're here." "To Barrie?" "Jerry, that'll take me an hour." "I said it's near Barrie. Besides, it won't take you that long. There's no traffic this early in the morning." I grunted. "Come on, man, do me a solid. I helped you that time that woman tried to sue you after her sister got killed by those spooky kids." I grunted again. Jerry wasn't usually able to talk me into doing things I didn't want to do, but on those rare occasions when he did, I refused to acknowledge him with actual words. The thing was, I did sort of owe him, and not just because of the incident with those spooky kids. I had learned early on that if you were going to make a living as a supernatural detective, then it was a good idea to have a supernatural lawyer. Jerry had passed the bar years before he started selling haunted real estate, but these days he only practiced law on special occasions. He was a great resource when I needed legal advice, or when I required actual representation. Jerry was a tenacious, sharp-minded debater who didn't know when to quit. It was because of these traits that I knew there was no point in arguing with him. "It's still going to take me a while to get out there." "That's okay," Jerry said. I could feel his relief exuding across the phone line. "Thanks, Felix. Seriously." I grunted for a third time and hung up the phone. I don't like being in the woods at night. It's a common phobia among those who have been to the Blacklands. My one and only excursion was brief, nothing more than a few steps onto that Plutonian shore, but it was enough to put me off trees and darkness for good. The place where I was headed wasn't very deep in the woods, and that was the only reason I didn't turn around and drive straight back home. I took the 400 out of the city, got off at Shore Acres Drive near Cookstown, and was presently bumping along an unpaved road with nothing on either side except a few trees interspersed between fields of freshly turned earth. I spotted Jerry's car, a black 1968 Ford Galaxy, fully restored and the only thing Jerry truly loved, parked up ahead on the side of the road. I pulled in behind it and turned off the engine. The headlights went out at the same time, and my stomach clenched painfully as the darkness came flooding in. I sat and took a few deep, steadying breaths. I saw the interior light of Jerry's car come on as he got out to meet me. Jerry was short and bald, with bright, animated eyes and a stubby chin. He reminded me a bit of the manic money launderer Joe Pesci played in the Lethal Weapon movies. Jerry had the attention span of a hummingbird and the metabolism to match. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and black track pants with white stripes down the sides. His usual preference was for expensive suits and loud ties, but it wasn't the sort of thing one would be wearing at this hour. Still, I was a little taken aback to see him dressed so casually. He looked decidedly un-Jerry. "This better be important," I said, climbing out of the car. "It is." Jerry's eyes flicked nervously to the side. "At least I think it is." "You think?" I followed his gaze to the house across the road. There was a car and a van parked in the gravel driveway. The van had something printed on the side, but it was too dark to read. Jerry said, "I'm worried about Julie Spiro." The name sounded familiar, but my brain was too foggy from lack of sleep to make the connection. "She's the interior decorator I hired to fix up the place," Jerry said. "She the one you're sleeping with?" Jerry looked aghast. You mean Barbara? Hell no, I ended that months ago. So you're not sleeping with this one? Well, Jerry tilted his head to the side. Not yet. She's a work in progress. Sort of like your house. Jerry's eyes flitted across the street again. So why are you worried about this woman if you're not sleeping with her? Because she's not answering my calls. I hate to say it, Jerry, but there might be a connection there. Would you get your mind out of the gutter, Jerry snapped. This isn't about sex. Did you tell her you're a writer yet? I am a writer, Jerry said. I've written books. Yeah, I said. Time Life books. Those are books? What do I need to do? Pump out fucking War and Peace before I can call myself a writer? Did you tell her you write Time Life books? Jerry frowned. No. I spread my hands as if to say, well, there you go. That's besides the point, Felix. So there is a point to my being out here in the sticks at 4 a.m. There is if you'd shut up and listen. I gestured for him to go on. Jerry cleared his throat and smoothed down a tie he wasn't wearing. I think Julie might be in trouble. I talked to her earlier today, or yesterday I guess it was, and she mentioned she was going to stay late with the guy she'd hired to work on the house. I looked over at the van parked next to the car. Julie and I have been working together closely since I picked up the place. We talk on the phone a dozen times a day, we've exchanged hundreds of emails and texts, and after a while things started to get a little flirty. Jerry put on a face that managed to look both sly and embarrassed. Then they started to get a little dirty. Jerry, skip to the emergency. So anyway, we talked about getting together later tonight, grab a bite to eat or something, once the guys were done. When I didn't hear from her at 8 o'clock, I tried calling her, but didn't get an answer. I tried again at 8:30, 9, 9:30. At 10 o'clock, you drove out here, I finished. Actually, I fell asleep, Jerry said a little guiltily. I woke up around 2:30 and tried calling her again. I still didn't get an answer, and that's when I started to get worried. Maybe she didn't have her phone with her. Jerry shook his head. If you'd met her, you'd know how crazy that sounds. Julie's one of these people who has her smartphone permanently grafted to her hand. Well, maybe she's ignoring your calls. Jerry said, I considered that, but I could tell from the dismissive way he said it that he didn't count this as an actual possibility. I decided to cruise by her place and her car wasn't there. This, Jerry gestured at the house, was the only other place I could think of, so I drove out here and found her car. I was about to check inside the house, but then I saw the work van parked here too. So? Jerry frowned. So? This is one of my houses, Felix. As in haunted? As in potentially paranormally dangerous? That you're planning to fix up and sell to someone, I pointed out. I screen all potential buyers, Jerry said defensively. Besides, most of the people that go in for this stuff don't buy the properties to live in them anyway. They collect them the way other people collect stamps or baseball cards. So what's the deal with this place? It's a relatively new house, built around 20 years ago, back when the urban sprawl in Toronto was really, well, sprawling. People were looking for places like this, close enough to the city to commute, but far enough away from the noise and crime and general craziness. I twirled my hand in a let's move this along gesture. So anyway, the couple who bought this place had only been living here a couple of weeks when the husband got up one night and killed his wife and son. I haven't been able to dig up much on the case. This happened pre-internet. But I do know the same thing happened to the next couple who moved in. Except in that incident, it was the wife who killed her husband. They didn't have any kids, so the case wasn't quite as sensational as the first one. But at their respective trials, both of the accused claimed to have been under the influence of quote-unquote outside forces. Jerry paused. That's legalese for possession. I'm guessing they were both convicted. Oh yeah, Jerry said. You know how hard it is to prove possession by a supernatural entity in a court of law? Only because you keep telling me about it. Jerry nodded. It's very hard. Nearly impossible. I can count the number of acquittals on one hand. Hell, until 30 or so years ago, the charge was still being called demonic possession, which brought in all kinds of religious implications that don't exactly mesh well with the judicial process. It's hard enough to defend a case that involves paranormal phenomena without throwing God and the devil into the mix. So what are you planning to do, Jerry? Fix up the house, put it back on the market, and see if the third time's the charm? I told you, Jerry said impatiently. I inform all potential buyers about what they're getting into. It's the law. Full disclosure of any and all supernatural activity on the premises. Doesn't that affect business? For some people, sure, but not me. Jerry flashed his winning salesman grin. There's nothing wrong with putting a little super into the natural of people's lives. Very nice, I said. I can picture it written on bus stop benches all over the city. It already is. Thanks for noticing. I've never understood how you can sell haunted houses. Most of the entities I deal with aren't even violent, Jerry said. They're playful, mischievous. Tomato, tomato. Jerry spread his hands magnanimously. If the situation gets serious, I'll have the place demolished, okay? If it gets serious, you'll have the Paranormal Intelligence Agency on your ass. I looked over at the house. Besides, demolishing the place wouldn't fix the problem, and you know it. If there's a portal somewhere in there, you could knock down the walls, fill in the foundation, and salt the earth. It's not going to change anything. It's not going to come to that, Jerry said firmly. It never has before. There's a first time for everything. Jerry grunted. This interior decorator, what did you say your name was? Julie Spiro. Why does that name sound familiar? She used to have a home improvement show on the Learning Channel. I remembered now. Not so much the show as the woman who hosted it. A tall brunette with freckled cheeks who looked as good in a suit and heels as she did in a t-shirt and cargos. She had a friendly, down-home country look, but she wasn't afraid to call out a contractor when he had fucked something up, or confront a supplier when he was trying to screw her on costs or a deadline. In short, the kind of woman who would have eaten a guy like Jerry for lunch. Is the show still on? No, Jerry said. It got cancelled. She still fixes up houses, she just doesn't have a camera crew following her around anymore. I nodded at the house. And you didn't check to see if she's in there? I started to, Jerry trailed off. I thought I saw someone moving around inside, but it's hard to tell because all the windows are boarded up. I yelled her name a few times, but no one came out. But you didn't go inside. I saw a momentary flash of shame in Jerry's eyes, then his face hardened. If I'd gone inside, I wouldn't be standing out here wondering what the hell's going on, would I? I almost said something snide, but I kept my mouth shut. After all, who was I to talk? The private detective who was afraid to go into the woods at night. Jerry took my silence as an insult. You think I like calling you up and asking you to come out here to hold my hand? You could have called the police. Jerry scoffed. Yeah, sure. No offense, but if this turns out to be nothing, I'd rather be chewed out by you than the cops. He looked over at the house. But I don't think this is nothing. I've got a real bad vibe. They could be working in there, I said, even though I didn't really believe it. I didn't share Jerry's bad vibe, but I had to admit there was something vaguely unsettling about seeing Julie Spiro's car and the workman's van parked next to an abandoned house way out here in the middle of nowhere. Maybe they're pulling an all-nighter. Jerry shook his head. I haven't got the power turned back on yet. It wouldn't be working in the dark. He had me there. Okay, we'll check it out. But if this turns out to be nothing, you're buying me breakfast. Deal, Jerry said in a flat voice. I got a flashlight out of my car and started across the road. I realized Jerry wasn't following me and turned back to see him standing on the gravel shoulder. He looked like a little kid waiting for a school bus that was never going to come. He was staring at the flashlight in my hand. Where's your gun? He asked. In my closet at home. What's it doing there? Jerry's voice quivered with nervous anger. I call and tell you there's a potential supernatural menace in the house I'm renovating and you don't even bring a gun? You didn't tell me anything, I reminded him. You just asked me to come out here. Jerry frowned and marched over to his car. For a second I thought he was going to get in and drive away, but he was only going to the trunk. He popped it open and dug around inside for a bit. When he closed the lid and turned back around, he was holding a tire iron. Okay, he said, let's go. There were no streetlights on this stretch of road and the moon had set hours ago. It was dark, but not as dark as it could have been. The faintest hint of dawn was creeping up in the east, like a rheostat turned to its lowest setting. Jerry and I stood for a moment in front of the house, my flashlight playing back and forth across it. You didn't need to be a private detective to figure out it had been empty for a long time. The red brick facade was faded and crumbling, the roof was slumped and full of holes, and the front lawn was so overgrown that the flagstone path leading up to the front door had become a trench. As we walked up, I noticed that the windows were covered with sheets of plywood, a common sight at an abandoned building, but then I noticed the second floor windows had been boarded up too. That was a little unusual. People didn't usually bother to board up windows above the first floor. Kids and homeless people, the two groups most powerfully drawn to abandoned buildings, didn't typically travel around with ladders. The front door had been boarded up too, but someone had pulled off the boards and stacked them in a pile off to the side. I looked over at Jerry. Ready? He gripped the tire iron in both hands. Ready. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The hinges let out a drawn-out squeak that was so cliché that it made me feel as if this entire situation was going to turn out to be a silly misunderstanding. That feeling evaporated the moment I saw the body lying on the floor. And I'll stop right there. Thank you.